Hi there, it's Marzena. Fighting the only skill that I maxed out, the procrastination, I decided to squeeze one more project into 2023's schedule. It wasn't on my list, but I thought it's Christmas time, so why not make something Christmassy for my mom's seasonal decoration purposes? Let's make a pine fairy, but a really festive one. Let's dive in. For the victim of this project, I chose something new. A Generation 3 Monster High Cleo Denial. Not a fan of those new dolls, but maybe some Christmas miracle will change my mind here. First, let's undress her. I really like the more curvy silhouette of this doll, but what I am most afraid of is a very short-looking torso, especially the chest part. I prepped the doll as usual. I started by cutting her hair as close to the scalp as possible. I warmed up the head in a boiling hot water for about 1 minute and decapitated my doll after that. It was a bit harder than with old Monster High dolls, but I still managed not to damage the neck. So far so good. I removed the remaining hair plaques, and as you can see, they do not have any glue holding them in place, but rather some melted knots or something. With pure acetone, I removed the factory face. Don't mind Deuce here. It was supposed to be a different project, but he will have to wait a little bit longer for his time to shine. It was finally time for head shrinking, and finger crossed it will work well with G3 heads. Spoiler alert, it didn't. When I was done with the shrinking process, I needed to get rid of the sculpted on eyelids. I really don't like to be restricted by eye molds, so they just had to go. To prepare the head for the reroot, I painted the scalp green with acrylic paint and sealed that with a layer of watered down Mod Podge. I made some green hair from 100% acrylic yarn and rerooted the head, avoiding the middle part of the scalp. Even though the reroot wasn't full, it took me way longer than usual to finish. It feels like the vinyl of the G3 heads is way thicker than on the older Monster High doll lines. Before I secured the new hair with a high-tech glue, I widened the neck hole so more air could enter the head and let the glue dry quicker. After 2 days, I could finally reattach the head to the body. I trimmed down the neck pack, slimmed down the neck, and heated up the head a bit before popping it back on the body. Then I smoothed out the head to neck transition. I turned my girl into a cozy burrito. And she needed some fairy ears. Before I mixed my epoxy, I trimmed the original ears, just a bit. When the new ears were sculpted and cured, I gave them a little bit of sanding treatment. Sprayed the doll with 3 layers of Mr. Super Clear varnish, and it was finally time for the face-up. I always start with some blushing and shading with soft pastels. Pan pastels are my personal favorite. A lot of doll customizers like to start with sketching the eye shape. I like to make the face shape a bit more defined first, but whatever works for you is fine. This first phase of face up can take between 2 to 5 layers of pastels and sealant, depends on how far I want to go with the color change. Only when I am happy with the shading, I will move to sketching the face features like eyes and lips. Of course, that doesn't mean that the blushing and shading is finished, but those few first layers just help me see the face shape a little bit better, and I like that. This was the first time I worked on the new line of Monster High dolls. And if you watched my videos where I talked about them, you know that I wasn't, well, too excited when they came out. So you might wonder if working on one changed my mind or not. Well, it was an experience. Was it a fun experience? Not really. The doll itself is beautiful, nicely done, cute. I bet kids may really like it. It's just so not compatible with my repaint style. I never struggled so much with eyes. I like drawing my eyes small. It is always a challenge cause Monster High characters just have huge eyes in their original design, so it's always working against the face sculpt for me. But it's also never so difficult. I guess my main problem with G3, or at least with Cleo here, is that the eyes area and the upper part of the face in general is so huge compared to the pretty small lower part of the face. And the most annoying thing is that I've seen so many wonderful G3 repaints, but I just couldn't make it work for me. Maybe Cleo wasn't the best choice for the first G3 custom. I believe Draculora doesn't have the sculpted on eyelids, so her face may be more versatile than Cleo's. Other than the face sculpt, I also struggled with building up the eye color. The green pencils just didn't want to cooperate with me. I think I will just avoid green eyes in the future. Although I am not sure if it's those particular pencils' problem. They seem to work pretty much okay on the eyebrows. Maybe this project just hated me. Anyway, I didn't think that starting over would help me in any way. I would have to switch the head for some old Monster High doll, and where's the challenge in that? So I just continued working on this face. Added lashes, freckles, and finally the teeny tiny highlights. And let's call it done. As you can see here, head shrinking is not the easiest on those new dolls. I repeated the process 5 times here, and the difference is barely visible. Normally it takes me 2 or 3 repeats to achieve amazing results, so here you have it. Generation 3 Monster High dolls. Stubborn as hell. But if you don't have what you like what you have. I secured the new face and hair under the protective wrap and went straight to the body mutilation. Since it was my first G3 body, I wanted to keep the pose simple. All I needed to do was to cut her torso in half to make a slight change to the curvature of the spine later. Then I sanded down all the rough edges, plastic seams, and panties, and factory numbers. I also had to sand down the sculpted on bandages that this doll has on her left lower leg and right forearm. I always hated those sculpted on elements. And I am not saying that as a customizer. I can dislike the faces or body proportions, but I get that those are toys for kids, not crafting materials for people like me. But I feel like sculpted on bandages, fur, vines, etc. just make the doll less versatile to play with. But that's just my opinion. It was hard to make the post-bandages surfaces smooth, so I decided to rough up the opposite limbs instead. This is a pine girl, so some wood texture on her body should be more than accurate. I drilled a hole in the lower part of the torso for the wire that will reconnect both pieces. But I had no clue how to place it in the upper piece. It turned out that I am not a fan of the additional torso joint. I tried to remove it, but it wasn't that simple. So I just destroyed the torso a little bit more, just to ease my frustration. I finally placed the wire and connected two parts of the body with it, and a lot of super glue and hot glue. It was also time to fix the pose in place. When the glue dried and cooled, I took the customizer's best friend, Epoxy Sculpt, and put it to work. I covered all the joints and resculpted the stomach part. As I said in the beginning, another no-no for me when it comes to those new dolls is very short chest part. It makes the doll look proportionally unbalanced. But there's nothing that a brand new pair of bigger bazookas can't fix. And yeah, I actually started to like this doll. I had to squeeze the new breasts a little bit, and I left the epoxy to cure completely. And after, I gave the whole body a good sanding treatment. I also carved some wood texture on the legs and forearms. It was quite tricky to smooth everything out after this, so I pulled out heavy equipment, my heat gun, and carefully melted the curved surfaces with a hot air. It worked quite well. Time for the second part of the sculpting phase. Let's make this body a bit more interesting. I created some bark pieces that I blended with the body. I also bulked up the wrists and ankles of our little tree fairy. You will see why in a second. As a respectful pine fairy, she just needed a pine cone pattern added somewhere in her design, right? I sculpted it on her shoulders, wrists, hips, and ankles. And done! The sculpting on the doll was finished. I let the epoxy cure, gave it the last sanding treatment, and sprayed the entire body with Barbarian Flesh Primer and 2 layers of MSC. I wanted to start body blushing, but I decided to drill the holes for the stand attachment and her future wings first. On to the blushing. As always, I tried to match the blushing and shading on the body with the one on the head. Duh. I used to dislike the body blushing part of the customization, but it grown on me and now I quite enjoy it. I covered the bark pieces with the brown wash to emphasize the wood texture. And I added some black shading to each of the pine cone's scales. Of course, the freckles were a must. They are always a nice detail. And then I made a dumb decision and highlighted one of the scales, just to see how it would look. There's nothing wrong with trying some new ideas. You can always erase it. Worst case scenario, you will like it and now you will have to repeat it on every single tiny element that you have here. Great. Anyway, I painted her nails a dark green and the body was actually done. Well, I only needed to fix up her neck a little bit. I must say, I felt a bit discouraged after the face-up, but she didn't end up that bad. I kinda like her. Okay, body, check. Let's make her wings. I used my usual method and created the wings from the UV resin. I taped the drone pattern to my plastic ruler and filled it with the resin, with the properly bent pieces of wire, of course. I cured the resin under the UV lamp and removed the wings from the plastic. I corrected the shape using my micromotor. Wiped the dust away and drew the pattern with a permanent marker. Then I airbrushed the transparent green paint over the pattern that I just drew. And I topped it with some nice color-shifting paint. I sealed everything with a layer of resin. All I had to do on the other side was to cover the wire and add the color-shifting paint again. Last layer of resin and repeat for all remaining wings. Shiny! To the stand! I picked this round wooden box and I used my good old kitty litter method on it. I made some borders from duct tape and I prepared a kitty litter and wood glue mixture that I spread on my stand. After maybe 2 hours or so, The mixture wasn't sticky anymore, so I started to poke some indentations in its surface. After another 2 or 3 hours, I could remove the tape and leave the stand to cure completely overnight. On the next day, I took blue, white and black acrylics and painted the stand. I sealed the paint job with a layer of varnish. To attach the doll to her stand, I drilled a hole in a proper place. I drilled 2 because the first one was a little bit off. And I superglued a long thick wire inside the doll's leg. Off camera, I sculpted a gift box from Super Sculpey and painted it with acrylics and pastels. It wouldn't be a Christmas tree without the present under it, right? I glued the box in its rightful place and I drilled a big hole in the bottom. I used super glue to put our doll permanently on her spot and hot glue to secure the wire in the inside of the stand. Okay, why the hole in the box, you might ask? Well, I wanted to add some Christmas lights to our fairy and hide the battery inside the stand. Yet the lights that I had were a little bit boring. Let's make them way more festive. I used a silicone mold, some colorful resin pigments, and an UV resin. I mixed my resin with yellow, blue and red pigments and filled the proper mold parts. Cured it under an UV lamp, and it left me with 2 matching halves of a whole sphere. I made 15 of those spheres, 5 in each color. To fit the light inside, I made an indent in each half with my Dremel. Then, with just a small drop of resin, cured under UV lamp, I placed the spheres around the lights. I wish there were more lights on this court, but it was not that bad, so once again we liked what we had. One last element to make were the Christmas ornaments. I could finally use this nasty ultralight Super Sculpey clay, from which I sculpted lots of tiny balls and a star for the top of the tree. I painted everything with blue, red and gold acrylics and sealed it with gloss varnish. To finish them off, I mixed an UV resin with a gold pigment and I put a tiny blob of it on each piece of ornament. Let's finally switch to the hair. I made a cone out of an EVA foam and covered it with hair wefts. Then I just needed to hot glue the cone to the top of our fairy's head. Perfect. This hairstyle was a total experiment. I literally had no idea if the vision that I had in my head will look anyway decent in real life. But I had to try. I separated a portion of hair over the hairline and started to make the individual spikes that, ideally, should look like the pine tree's branches in the end. When I finished the lower line, I went up and up and up until I reached the top. Not a perfect representation of a pine tree, but pretty decent Christmas hairstyle, if I might say. Good job, me. To make it even more Christmassy, I glued on the ornaments. I also gave my girl the ornament earrings. Looking festive. I dragged the light beads through the hole in the box and hid the battery inside the stand. I positioned the cord in the box around her leg and in her hands so it would look like she found the box somewhere and is just looking through the Christmas decorations that were inside. The cord was too silver and shiny, so I painted it with dark green acrylic paint. The last thing to do for this stand was to add the crystal snow paste and put the lid of the box in place. I almost forgot about her wings. I glued them in place using super glue, and the Christmas pine fairy was finally done. I know I didn't make it for Christmas with this girl. I really tried. It wasn't my procrastination this time, but a little sickness that got me and my husband just in time to mess with my work schedule. We are fine now though, and I hope that there's still some Christmas spirit left in you and that this video will bring you some festive vibes just in time for carnival season. Despite the base doll giving me some hard times during this project, I am pretty happy with how she turned out in the end. Both the face and the body weren't the easiest to tackle for me, but I believe I did my best and the result is not half as bad as I was afraid it could be. And what do you think about this festive girl? Is she Christmassy enough? Will she be a good Christmas tree for my mom's next year decoration? Please let me know in the comments. Did I do a good job with this first G3 custom of mine? And would you like to see more of those in the future? If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And be sure to subscribe to my channel with the bell if you're curious about what I'm gonna do next. Also, check out my social media for some sneak peeks and video announcements. I hope that 2024 will be a happy year for all of us. We survived this one, so rejoice! Thank you guys for watching, Happy New Year, and see you soon! Co to? Co to? Hej! Papik. Papik. Nie chce mi się wstawać.